have its own style or cultural dress?
Well, I don't think Australia has a national dress at all, but I think they have certain thematics that they play around, one of which, of course, is the bush clothing, the R.M. Williams kind of dress, the Akubra hat, which is taken up by Indigenous people as well. Beachwear, Australian designers have been extremely successful as beachwear and surfwear designers. And I think Australiana, as I came in, I just saw an image of Jenny Keys on your slideshow. And of course, in the 70s, the Australiana fad really got going. So I think Australians like to mythologise about their identity, but they don't have what I call a national dress as such. We are so diverse, and I just don't feel, other than Indigenous people who would wear perhaps body marking, the red loincloth and so on at ceremonial events, I don't think white European Australians here have a national dress. They perhaps have, within certain clusters of culture, their own Sudanese or Muslim or whatever dresses they might bring out for occasions, celebratory occasions, or their national day. I was at the Botanic Gardens the other day, and it was a Japanese day, and out came the kimono, and so I think it's still there.
And Faiza, you obviously work a lot with refugees who come to Australia, and do you find that once they come to Australia there's an alteration of their cultural dress, or perhaps even the opposite, that they're more attached to their cultural dress, having left that behind in a sense, and feel perhaps more attached to it?
Yeah, look, I think it depends. There are both. There are those who, stick with their traditional dress, and those who just discard it and adopt a new persona or a new type of dressing. It depends. It's an individual choice, and it's a choice that's also informed by the economic status of the person. Especially for women, I find that women who stay at home, have limited income, and have no opportunity of engaging in the mainstream activities and contributing, tend to maintain the identity that they brought with them. It's almost that they are in a time warp, while other women who are given opportunities are able to have extra income that allows them to go out and buy luxury items, tend to change, and it's a progressive change. Again, the traditional dress becomes an occasional dress. Some continue wearing it, especially for us in Sudan, because the traditional dress for men and for women is not an occasional dress. It's an everyday dress. And so some women continue to wear it on a daily basis. They wear it at work, they wear it when they're shopping and so on. And others, probably like me, keep it for occasions or when they are just networking or visiting and so on. I guess the other aspect of it is our children. How are they responding to that? I find that children want to be part of the mainstream community. They want to belong. And maybe, Julie, you could talk a little bit about that. But I find my children not wanting to adopt the traditional dress, but just wanting to wear, the jeans, they drop pants and all those sort of things, and have nothing to do with traditional dress. However, at some stage, I'm finding my daughter now, she's in, almost 20, 21. She's looking back and starting to ask questions about, her heritage, her traditional dress, and sometimes borrowing items from me to wear them and mixing and matching her dress. Yeah. So it depends. Yeah.
And is it a subversive act when you do have a dominant cultural dress and certain members of the community decide that they no longer want to partake in that sort of, I suppose, cultural identity?
Oh yes. I mean, I remember when in the wake of September 11, every time you walk out and you're dressed in an Islamic gear, you were verbally abused. So sometimes, when you're on the wrong side of the road, it becomes very difficult for you to maintain a cultural identity. And so some women, and I remember some young girls, took off their hijab and adopted a different identity or a different cultural identity. Some people changed their name, while others totally flipped on the other side and became more fanatical in their tradition and adopted a very stringent form of hijab and so on. So I think it depends. One other aspect for me is body shape. Again, when I go shopping, I don't find things that suit my cultural or religious gear. I don't find long sleeves, long skirts, things. So I tend to mix and match, and the same for my daughter, she wears a pair of pants, a skirt, a short sleeve shirt, and then on top of it, a singlet on the outside. So 5-6 pieces of material plus the scarves. It's like a walking wardrobe because you don't have, the fashion or the garments in your department store that you can pick that allows you to wear your everyday gear.
Could I just say something here? I think that's a very interesting comment in the light of globalisation. We have this sense, or we're told, that everybody is buying the same kind of T-shirts, jeans and so on. It's my contention, and you might argue with me about this, but I think globalisation should be actually divided into something else, which might be called glocalisation. I think everybody puts themselves together in the way that best suits their own feelings, their perhaps cultural heritage, their families, their religion. I think global clothing is not as global as everybody maintains.
And I think certainly that idea of global, local or glocal is a term that I've heard as well, and I think that there are sort of more and more, particularly academics, saying, there's not just this global thing happening. There's still, it's all about personal. Again, it comes back to personal identity. People are modifying things for themselves, and you can never just sort of generalise. Even in the mainstream fashion industry, say with trends, there's never just one trend that everyone's abiding by. People are always sort of taking what they want from it. But do you think that that's a contemporary tendency, or do you think that that's something that's been going on for a long time?
I think the pressure has come from the marketplace to dress similarly. If you want to have cheap clothing, you go to wherever you go, Kmart or whatever. But I think people nowadays pick and choose, and I think it also happens in places like Africa, where lots of second-hand clothing has become available, and even there, they pick and choose. They do not necessarily simply wear the Levi jeans or whatever they've been sent over. And I think there's hope for all of us in this. It's creative. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I think too that idea of second-hand clothing and vintage clothing. I mean, I know for me that you were saying you find it difficult when you go shopping. I mean, I don't buy any new clothes because I find I can't find any, so I buy vintage clothing. And I think perhaps that's part of it too. The rise in vintage is in itself a way to perhaps customise, pick and choose beyond whatever the dominant, fashion machine is producing at any given time. And also, I think that in itself plays with time too, because if you've got people sort of mixing and matching cultural identities and time pieces within their clothing, you get to have this very interesting...
what is up to date? Up to date is how you see yourself. Yeah. Interestingly, in Zambia, where there's a very sort of significant second-hand clothing market, people buy bits and pieces and actually unpick them and resew them so they get what they want. And I think that's asserting their own identity, if you like, or their own personality. It's not simply going and buying what they're given. It's much more personal than that.
And I know you contended a little bit with the idea of globalisation, but do you think that globalisation has, let's say that globalisation has affected cultural dress and fashion globally? Do you think there is such a thing as a national dress anymore, a particular national style? I mean, you said no for Australia, but what about the rest of the world?
I think there are places, of course, where there are national clothes. And in fact, there is a slide up there of the Zambian High Commissioner meeting the Queen, which is one of my favourite photographs, because I was very fortunate. Just stop me if I'm going on too long.
Nope, I won't. Keep going.
I was very lucky to meet the High Commissioner when I was in England, and I asked him about this clothing, and he told me that his wife had actually made the sisulu, which is a little pleated skirt. These are traditional garments, and it is the national dress of Zambia. It's a dress of a particular tribe, but this is what often happens with national dress. One tribe dominates over another. So he's wearing this little pleated skirt, which his wife made. She chose the fabric. He's wearing a business shirt. He's wearing a version of the red Zambian sort of cap on his head. But the thing that I really love about it is that he found in London that he got very cold and he couldn't go barefoot to meet the Queen. So his wife went out to Clark's shoe shop, which is very much like, it's even less than Mather's. I mean, what is it? She bought him the socks and shoes so that he could be warm when he visited the Queen. But she herself is in such ritualised clothing as well. It's not a national dress, but it's...
Well, and she has a very particular personal style that, in a sense, because she's representative of a country, almost becomes a kind of cultural dress, even if it's only associated with that one individual. I actually saw quite recently a major fashion magazine, it might have been British Vogue, did a breakdown of her clothing over a year, and they broke it into colours and how much of a percentage of the year, say 30% yellow, 12% blue. And it was really, really interesting to see just how consistent her clothing is and how she favours particular colours. And I'm sure within that context of, meeting people from all over the world, she's almost, in those situations, got her own cultural dress on.
She also has every item of clothing labelled and with where she's worn it. She's kept every single thing that she's ever worn.
Wow, that's quite a collection.
You might like to curate it.
Yes, I would like to curate it. Okay, I want to ask you something else. So if cultural dress can communicate, traditions, history, cultural identity, can traditional dress be fashionable?
That's a really interesting question. I think fashion designers plunder the dress of customary, the customary dress
Definitely.
of peoples. The kimono or oriental fabrics. There's a whole host of ways in which Western fashion designers, Lisa Ho, we were talking about, she's very much interested in Eastern ideas.
It definitely inspires us. So you see something and it just sort of triggers something, and then you give your own take on it. Sometimes I guess it could be seen as an insult, but I've never even considered that, to be honest. but it's also, I guess it's a compliment at the same time, because you see something beautiful in the traditional dress.
Inspiring.
So it is. You can't help but have that in your head. Like even your outfit, I've been looking at it going, yep, love the colour. Do you know what I mean? Really? And I'm just like, I've got to get one of those when I get to New York.
Well, I think that idea of textiles too, Margaret, which you raised just then, I do have a slide somewhere of Alexander McQueen, who played a lot with his Scottish heritage and used tartan a lot in his clothing. And there's, paisley, tartan, those things sort of become very mainstream. And often the cultural origin is lost. I mean, I'm sure most people, when they're wearing something that's tartan or paisley, don't think about the cultural history,
Definitely.
The political history of those fabrics. But also I think, we were talking about the hijab before, I think also the hoodie is another garment that often has sort of a very stereotypical political meaning, particularly within the mainstream media. So I suppose those meanings change, but also sometimes fashion comes to dominate them so much that cultural meaning gets lost over time.
Well, you're talking about Scottish clothing. I mean, that's called a national dress of Scotland, but it's very recent. It was invented, I think, in the 18th century. So everything has its own sort of nuances.
And I suppose there's fashion in cultural dress too. There's changes in fashions in cultural
dress.
There's
so many changes. There's so much introduction of modern for instance, plastic is worn by New Guinean wigmen. I think there's an image of that. In the South Seas, people make baskets with bits of old Coles bags. It's a way in which tradition begins to mix in with contemporary sort of materials, and it's very nuanced, really.
Yeah, for me, I mean, as I said, in Sudan, the top is worn on a daily basis, and It is very fashionable in terms of the material changes, the design. While it's just one piece of fabric, but the color, it comes in vogues. There are different colors, there are different materials. The work, the detail changes, the stitching, the way it's decorated and so on. The way it's worn doesn't change, but how you couple it with the dress beneath it, with the shoes, it's all very fashionable, and it's just fantastic to go to a wedding or an event and see women. It's just like a peacock walking around. Everyone's showcasing what they have, and they handle each one. Where'd you get that? And this is nice. And they check each other out. It's fantastic. I think it changes. I remember last year I was in Dubai, and I wanted to buy a abaya. Abaya is the black garment that women in Saudi Arabia wear all the time. But for me, it's easy when I want to go to the mosque, when I want to pray. I don't have to worry about changing. I just put it on sometimes. Going to the shop while you're still in your tracksuits, cleaning the house, and remembered something, you just put it on, jump in the car, go and buy. It's an easy solution, very practical.
Let's all take another.
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
Incredibly practical.
Yeah.
So we were in Dubai, and I just said, "Oh, gee, Dubai, let me check, the stores." The high end of Dubai has all the brand labels. You got your Prada, your Dior, your whatever. And I went into this shop that had like heaps of black abayas, and I'm looking at them. Okay, cheap one, $300 US, $400 US, $1,200. It's just a black abaya.
How much would it normally be, Faiza?
Look, I was expecting $40, maybe
Wow.
$60 for a decent one with a bit of sparkle and sprinkle.
So was it
and stuff
because
like
of
that?
that luxury context?
It became a luxury context, and the material changed. The actual cut didn't change, but just the stitching, the fine detail has changed, and it got a label on it. So your Dior, your Gucci are doing a big job over there.
Yeah.
But I've even seen a Dior hijab.
Oh, yes.
With a big signature.
Absolutely. So, it's globalization, it's marketing, it's making money wherever that money is, regardless of whether you agree with the context or with the cultural nuancing of what people are wearing or not. So I was surprised, and I said, well, I better go to the markets where the women are sitting down doing it for $30 and bought a cheap one, and I wear it to the shopping centre.
Juli, I want to go back to something that you said in passing before about the concept of a fashion designer appropriating cultural dress and whether that, I suppose, has an ethical boundary to it. And I'm thinking about Australian contexts where, say, Indigenous designs have been appropriated, and there's been instances where those have been collaborative processes. And there's also been instances where, someone like Jenny Key, for instance, to this day, her designs borrow very, very heavily and not in a, let's say, culturally sensitive way from Indigenous Australians. What do you think the designer's responsibility is when they are working with a culturally sensitive garment?
I guess it depends on how far you want to take it and what it is that you want to do. So if it's just to take inspiration, I feel that, it's a big compliment. If you're incorporating, for instance, I've currently redesigned the uniforms for Virgin Australia, and we just launched Virgin Samoa. So I had to design a scarf. So we had to work with they call it a tattoo artist, to develop a certain print, and we had to put that on the scarf, and it had to be to scale, and it was very specific. And then I had my say, I did a bit to it and put a border around the scarf. When it comes to things like that, I think it's really relevant that we do respect the culture, especially because it's going to be something people are going to see every day coming to Samoa. But when it's just, taking inspiration from an obi, I wouldn't even think about it. I know that sounds really arrogant, but it wouldn't even occur to me.
And those silhouettes have become quite universal in a sense too.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the best way of getting inspiration, and you look at the runways at the moment and you see what's out there, and you can sort of almost see, you can see some embroidery that's, very Indian, and then they've made it contemporary and into their own. And it's really inspiring for us. But yeah, I wouldn't even consider it, to be honest. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit too about you. In 2009, you were selected to work with Trade India as a brand ambassador, and you actually went to India and worked with craftspeople there, didn't you?
It was fantastic. So basically, Brand India was coming to Australia, and it was holding a trade fair, and in this trade fair it wanted to promote Indian manufacturers to the Australian fashion designers. And they wanted to do a fashion parade, and what they needed was something to sort of join the two. So they got me an Australian fashion designer, and my job was to create a collection that integrated Australian fashion design and Indian techniques. So they could have done something themselves, but it would have looked very Indian. So I went to India, I worked with 3 different manufacturers, and it was fabulous. Like, they literally have, the floors of all the workers, and the women sitting in a pile, like hand sewing, and all the men beading on the machines, and it was one of the best experiences. I was there for 2 months, all up in the end, and it was so interesting to learn about the culture, to learn about the bright colours, and in that respect you can't help but be inspired. Like, just going to India, there's just colour everywhere, and I normally work in muted tones. Everything I do, even something like this, which isn't mine but is always muted, and the first time I'd used magenta, yellow, turquoise, and it's just so inspiring. So yeah, it was, you just almost can't even help it. You don't think about it, it just happens. Yeah.
And a lot of designers do rely on artisans, from countries like India to actually be able to create the level of, say, beadwork in their work.
I used to work for Easton Pearson. My mum actually used to sew for them when I was a kid, and I used to cover their buttons for $1 each. Actually, no, it was 10 cents or something. But anyway, so then I went back. I was 8 when I did that, and then I went back when I was 18 and got a job with them. And they get all of their stuff made in India, and it's amazing. They go over there all the time, and it's amazing what they do. They have all the embroidery mats on the floor, and then they pick them up at night, and that's where they sleep. But Pam and Lydia basically work with one specific village over there, and they use them for inspiration as well. So it's really quite nice. They'll go over there with their ideas as well, but these people are so creative in their own right. It's what they do, and then they almost, if they had an idea, they'd put it forward. So it would almost be like a collaboration of, this is what we want to do, and then they'll do their version. So yeah, it's wonderful. Some amazing things have been done, and that's what happened in India. Like, I showed them what I wanted to do, and they came back with ideas which were fabulous, and I didn't even think it was possible. So that was what's so wonderful about working somewhere that you wouldn't normally. Yeah.
Do you think that there's a responsibility, though? I mean, obviously in that project that you did, it was very transparent what you were doing, where you were working with those people. But with high fashion labels, where the consumer is probably not aware that there's such input happening from, someone in India, do you think it's their responsibility to perhaps share that knowledge with the consumer? Margaret, what do you think about that?
Well, I think when Jenny Key started working in the 1970s, it was all very innocent. And I think she did it all in very good faith. Nowadays, I think there is a very important responsibility to credit all the people involved. And I think, I'm just forgetting the name of one particular designer who used Numina War for one of his designs, and he actually pays her copyright royalties for her design, and I think that's very good. So I think it's a question of the political situation has changed.
Yeah, and I suppose it's really down to individual designers too to make that call for themselves.
It would be a mistake for their business, I think, to not credit the original designers.
Yeah. And we've been talking a bit about garments, traditional garments that have sort of, I suppose, made the transition into dominant fashion. In cultures, say like in Japan, where Western fashion has really become quite massive, do you think there's a risk of the traditional garment, the kimono, and the skills used to create those garments actually being lost?
On the one hand, you think it just might, but on the other, you were talking about your daughter. who is asking questions. And I think there's a recouping of past losses, and I think we see it all over the place. We see it in the South Pacific, people wanting to recreate their dance tradition, Indigenous people wanting to keep their languages. And once a thing is apparently fading away, suddenly, what should we do about this? Let's kind of sort of remember.
It almost gets too late, and then...
It is sometimes too late, but at other times it isn't quite, and I think that's what's happening now.
Well, and we are, I think I think people are very nostalgic. I think we're nostalgic creatures, and I suppose sometimes it takes maybe getting a little bit older, as you said your daughter is, to kind of have that perspective on something and be reminded and then actually see value in it.
Yeah. Look, that's actually a very, very interesting point, and I'm reflecting now because I was in Sudan in March this year, and I remember all my nieces and cousins and whatnot wearing that black abaya from Saudi Arabia, not the Sudanese traditional dress that my mother used to wear and all my aunties used to wear. And when I asked why, it was simply a financial thing. The abaya cost $40, while a decent, practicality, a decent tobe costs like $120. And with the tobe, because it's expensive, it's high maintenance, you wear it once, you have to go and wash it, iron it, and so on. And you can't wear it all the time because every time you need to change it. Color matters, whether you're wearing it in the morning, in the afternoon. It's got its own rituals around it. While with the abaya, you can wear it anywhere. So it is affecting the younger generation, are all wearing abayas. And they leave the dress to when they only get married. Do they start wearing it? Because it's very sensual, it's very beautiful. And they do it with the henna and so on. So I do worry about situations where it's not just the practicalities, but it's also the financial aspect of the traditional dress for people. Yeah,
it's really interesting what you're saying. In my mind, I'm thinking it's sort of like a fast fashion equivalent where people aren't necessarily spending money on a high-quality, high-fashion garment when they can go out and buy a $10 T-shirt and wear that instead. And so then the really the special garment perhaps is reserved for a particular occasion. Yes. It would never have occurred to me that there was an equivalent of something like that within the cultural dress context.
It is. And look, I mean, for me, coming from outside, that was very sad, but for them it was,
liberating.
I think it makes us really rethink the word traditional. It's not a static thing at all. It's something which evolves and changes with people, with ideas, with commerce, consumption, all kinds of things affect that term. And I personally like to use the word customary because I think customary does imply that the customs change.
And I think that concept of tradition as something quite static is something that, particularly the West, we have a very particular idea, and it's an imposed idea. It's something that we don't necessarily have, but we assume everyone else has.
We expect people, for instance, in the Pacific, to wear certain kinds of clothes.
Definitely.
And because we're tourists and they want to earn a living, they may actually perform for us in what they think is their traditional dress. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's equally interesting. I like the notion of traditional and customary because it has evolved. I remember photos of my grandmother where the tobe was just black or white, and you would wear the black one when you're a widow or when someone dies, and you would wear it for a year and then change into the white. And then photos of my mother when she was younger, and then colored photography came into being. There were subdued colors, the light sky blue colors and the pale pinks and so on. And I go now and they're bright colors. So while the design itself as a piece of material has not changed, and the way people wear it has not changed. Color has changed with time. and the material has changed with time. So that's actually, is that still traditional, or is it just...
Well, that's the question. And in a lot of countries, of course, colonialisation brought about kind of moral ideas about what you should be wearing, covering up the body and so on. And these things hang on in, say, the Pacific, where the lap or whatever is worn, as well as a grass skirt. It's a peculiar sort of tokenistic kind of reference.
And they do in the hotel, like in the hotels and everything, almost like you said, they perform. They do, and they really, you go to I've spent a bit of time in Fiji, and you see all the traditional dress for the staff and that, but just around where I've spent time, they just wear normal clothes. So yeah, it's great to see, but...
But is it almost then a costume?
Yeah.
Rather than
become,
personal dress, it's sort of it's dressing up in a
As
costume.
Exactly.
The morals of the visitors.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that.
Something else that's happened too, sort of probably in the last, I suppose, 10 years or so, is with fashion weeks, there's more and more fashion weeks happening all over the world. So it's not just, London, Paris, New York anymore. You've got Dubai, you've got Korea. Do you think that actually changes the cultural centres of fashion, or do you think we're still very much focused towards those main centres like Paris as where fashion comes from?
I don't know if I'm the right person to ask, really.
Well, anyone can answer that.
Yeah.
I think you've always got the leading places that people will look to, like Paris, Milan, New York, Sydney. Is so appropriate to be amongst there. But I guess, like even when I look at, when I went to Indian Fashion Week, it was so wonderful because it was so Western, but it had their take on it. So it's really nice to see that point of difference. So it can be really inspiring, and especially for local trade as well. It's, fashion is a business at the end of the day, and they're about making money, and doing something like that and putting glamour and, having something that people aspire to have, it's really good for the local community to have that. But as a fashion designer, I love seeing, I went to Delhi Fashion Week. I never thought I would do that, but it was fabulous. It had amazing things, and it just got my mind thinking to what else I could do.
I think it's worth thinking through quite carefully, because if you think about the Japanese, I think they really like the sort of Dior type clothing very much.
Yeah.
Luxury.
It sort of spells some sort of class thing. And yet you talk about India, which is so vibrant. And, one likes to feel that everywhere is having its own fashion week.
Yeah, exactly.
But there are some groups of people who still look towards the sort of authoritarian, the standards are being set by Europe or whatever.
Countries like Japan do have quite a reverential relationship, particularly with somewhere like Paris, where, even though... in the past 20 years, there have been big-name Japanese designers like Rei Kawakubo who have broken through and shown in Paris. I suppose it's, they haven't then said, okay, well, we're going to show our collections in Tokyo and try and change things. It's really, the aspiration is still Paris for them, I think.
Yeah, I think in the Middle East, for us, it's the same. The aspiration, and there is that reverence for Western fashion. But I also think fashion weeks like India or Delhi or so on, while being there for economic reason, they also cater for a new emerging market, which are people like me and people like my daughter, who are almost global in their way of thinking, and they can, move from one style to another very quickly, very fluently, without feeling that they need to use just one style. And we don't fit in any of the specific styles. We don't necessarily want to aspire to use Western, if I could use that terminology, fashion all the time, or traditional fashion all the time. We mix and match. And I find that I'm always gravitating towards things that have got a bit of glam in them, even my skirt. or a bit of, embroidery or something like that,
something
or a bit
beautiful.
of color. So I think in terms of economy and trade and business, they are addressing a specific market, young, emerging, with disposable income who can use that. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I think it's a new study here for your students.
Well, it's interesting though, because I think we've almost gone back to where we started when you started, Margaret, talking about individualism and personal identity, and the fact that I suppose that has for a lot of people become not necessarily more important, but perhaps as important as a cultural identity or a political identity expressed through clothing. It's as much about as you say, mixing and matching, being able to express personal identity and individual identity as well.
And information coming through the social media, I think, about clothes design should be mentioned here. I've been doing some work with a company where they put onto Facebook or whatever every day a series of designs, and then people who are on Facebook vote on which one they like, and that is the one that they produce for that day.
That's so
and
clever.
It has a political
awesome.
message.
Yeah.
It's responding to a particular news item.
Okay.
And I think that's really interesting.
I've actually seen that similar thing done in quite a commercial context too, where recently I think it was Country Road on their Facebook page asked people to comment on which garments from previous collections they most wanted to be re-released, and then they re-release things based on people's votes. So I guess again you could argue it's about individuals
it's
driving
people power or people consumer power. It takes away from that authoritarian, there's only one centre and that is Paris couture.
And there's one designer too. The great myth of fashion is that, you have one designer who's a genius who's creating things, when really we know that it's a collaborative process. There's many hands involved.
That's right.
A lot of designers, don't even draw or sew. They're part of a workroom of often women who are creating things as well. So I suppose it's about perhaps dispelling some of those myths as well.
Definitely. I work with my mum, and from what I start in my head, the end result is always different. So by the time you get to the pattern and then you get to the fabric, your idea is something completely different. Like it takes its own sort of shape and form. And like when I went into India, like you go in there and they give you great ideas, and it really is, it is definitely a collaboration. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's part and parcel of the creative process. I come from an architecture background, and you start with a dream in your head about what the building is going to look like, and by the end of it, when everybody has added their view of it, it's completely different.
Completely different, but amazing. Like that's
amazingly different.
And getting to that point
exciting.
is really interesting in how many people actually have that. But I think also just touching on something else you said, like being individual. There's a certain confidence that people need to have, and I find, especially in Australia, like it would be hard for imagine some people coming from overseas at 13 or 14 years old dressing traditionally. I think that really needs to be addressed. Like, as much as they'd want to keep that, I think that they would be forced in society to dress, especially in Australia, they would get teased at school, or, it's a really hard thing. And that's sort of something that I think is changing as well. You see not as many people dressing traditionally because of just the pressure at, at that age group.
Yeah, you're probably right, because I look back on my own children. I remember my son, he was in primary school, and he had to wear the traditional dress one time because it was our Eid day, and I, asked him to wear it just to tell people his story and his heritage and whatnot. He was young enough not to understand the consequence of that, so he put it on. And when he came home, he said, "I'll never listen to you again, Mom."
It's true.
So my relationship with him hit rock bottom that day.
So maybe it's balancing individuality with cultural identity with a bit of conformism as well, so you don't get teased too much.
Yeah, that's it. It's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a hard thing
now
to
he's
do.
much older. He wears it in his own right. I don't have to tell him.
He has the confidence to
he
carry
has
it
the
off
confidence
and
to
back
wear
up.
it, but he knows when to wear it and not when.
And peer pressure.
And peer pressure. So when he's hanging out with his friends, No, he doesn't wear it. But when he's going to the mosque, to the prayer, to the community, he has enough confidence to put it on. Yeah. I just wanted to mention probably one last thing. I mean, probably...
It has been about an hour, so any last comments before we throw it over?
It's the sense of fashion, and I'm happy for you to comment on that, because I don't think... And this is not in any way a negative comment. I don't get a sense that people here are very glamorous or very fashionable. I think generally people are just very practical in Australia. Because when I go back home wearing my normal stuff that I wear here, my mum looks at me with sadness in her eyes and say, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm okay." Says, "Do you have issues with your husband?" And I go, "No, everything is right." She goes, "Do you get paid well in your job?" And I go, "Yeah, like, really good stuff." So why are you dressed like that?
Yeah.
What you're saying is the essence of Australia.
That is.
And Margaret, you have written about that as well.
Yeah,
so maybe
really
you could comment
is.
on that history of Australian adoption of international style.
Well, there's a mythology again, that Australians just somehow keel over in front of like British fashion. But I don't think that's true at all, really. And this goes back to what I was saying before. It's what you feel as an individual, and I think Australia allows us to be individual. And we don't have the occasions, we don't have the kind of cultural sort of events or places to go, perhaps, that you do in Europe. And, the climate's different on the whole. It's just a more relaxed society.
But also, like this morning before I came here, I went to the Graceful School Fete to watch my niece perform, and I was walking through around the rides and stuff in this outfit. And
get stared at a lot, don't you?
And I wear this type of thing all the time because I can. Being a fashion designer means you can get away with wearing anything. But everybody was staring at people like, "Oh, where are you going?" And God forbid that I would just wear this on a normal day. And now people are used to me, but whenever I'd get dressed up, it's like, "Oh, are you going somewhere exciting?" Or it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And it just... I think that people really do dress to go out, but on a normal basis they don't. Yeah. And I mean, my mum used to wear high heels and take us kids up to Woolies and stuff, and that's where I got it from. But, now I bought her a pair of Pradas and she won't wear them. She's like, "No way, they're too uncomfortable." But it really, I think that a lot of people just don't dress up, and they have different values. People want to buy a house here. They have mortgages. You go to a place like New York, nobody owns anything. And
everyone looks fabulous.
Everyone looks amazing, but they don't own a house. That their kids don't have piano lessons and this and that. And I think that where they're spending their money is definitely different to other countries around the world.
I remember once I was in Sudan, and it's a long flight. It's like 24 hours flight. So you just wear your joggers and your faded jeans and any T-shirt that looks horrible. And I go home, everyone's there waiting for me, all dressed up to the nth degree, and I come in looking like a homeless person. And now my sister knows the look, so whenever I come, she'll take me and straight go into where we live. There is a beauty salon next door. She'll take me and prepare an outfit for me. Yeah. So we come out 3 months later, and I remember last time when my son was a little bit younger, I came back, he left the aeroplane with me looking very shabby. 3 hours later, I walked in the door, and he was like, "Mamma mia, look at you." Well, he can recognize his mother.
We all dress according to what our constellation of colleagues wear.
I think so. I mean, I know for me too, I have a similar experience to you, Jill. I mean, this is pretty much how I dress most of the time, and again, vintage too, which often sets you apart, and people often look. I mean, I only wear dresses, and I wear vintage dresses, so a lot of young women don't wear dresses. Yeah. But I think. I certainly feel lucky to be able to just have that level of personal expression, and the occasional look from someone isn't, it's not a hostile look. It's often actually quite a friendly look, and people, I don't know about you, but people will often say, oh, I love your dress, or, you look fantastic, or, and I think that that's, again, an indicator of perhaps Australia as, maybe a lot of people don't make the effort or they don't have the occasion to, but I think they are quite interested in fashion and quite appreciative of it as well.
It's a very tolerant society, in my view. And, I hope it remains that way.
Depending.
Well, on that note, I might open it up to everyone else. There'll be 2 microphones coming around, so if you can just wait until the microphone actually gets to you, and we will get to all of you. So if you just want to pop up your hand and wait for a mic to reach you. There's one there, there's one up there. Just keep your hand up until a mic comes to you, would be great. Okay.
I think the talk's been mostly about women's fashion, but there was a question early on about customary dress, and the one thing that came into my mind was the corporate suit and men's dress, which is still so unchanged, so maybe that could be considered a traditional costume.
Yeah, Margaret, what do you think about that?
Well, a business suit is a universal. It's probably one of the most globalised of clothes, that's true. Just on the other side, I think men are less anxious to... If you look at refugees coming to this country, it's usually the men who dressed rather like us as opposed to the women. I think men have found it much more accommodating to wear the clothes of the place where they have to be, and the business suit is worn absolutely everywhere. I wouldn't call it a traditional dress. It has its own history and so on. And it is also a fashionable garment. There are different types of suit depending on how much money you pay.
And there are subtle changes
absolutely
as well. It's
there are vintage business suits.
That's right, yeah. And when you do see a vintage business suit, you do actually really notice those changes. And if you were to go out and wear one among a group of men who are wearing contemporary suits, you would stand out.
It's a very subtle thing. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You have to have the right eyes, but you can see.
Yeah. But it's it's fabrication. It's small details like the lapel,
the cuff,
colour.
Yeah. How many buttons?
Yep.
Double-breasted, single-breasted.
And the fit too. I think at the moment there's a real focus on menswear and tailoring, particularly among young men, and sort of quite close fitting garments, and a lot of very slim cut suits. And even 5 years ago, if you went to an op shop and bought a suit and wore it against one of those, the fit would just be completely different. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, 2 things. One thing is, with individual fashion designers, is there any way that you plug in some of the money into community, for social education, social issues in their education and poverty? Is it all about designer labels and the fashion designer and the corporations making the money but not plugging it into community, for instance?
I think often...
Can we move towards that direction?
Eastern Pearson have done that.
Yeah.
They sponsor a village, I think it is in India, and that they basically support that village. So definitely, everybody, as a fashion designer, I one day hope to become a philanthropist and do that. But definitely, and I guess it's more like appreciation for the craft and the techniques that are years and years old. That's where you would want to be. And I mean, it's an endearing quality, like you look after your staff, but on a larger scale. So definitely.
And it comes back to it's really up to the designer. The onus is on the designer, and while some will definitely do that, others won't, and I think that's just part of
it
business.
Depends, yeah, and it depends. Like, I'm a designer for designer's sake. I am not a philanthropist because I don't really make money, and money I do always went back into the business. I had other jobs that supported my lifestyle. I worked at a pharmacy for 13 years, and I worked at Suncorp opening mail. So I did it for the love, unfortunately. I would have been in New York years ago if I did it for the money. So I guess it's a collaboration of when I go back into business, I'll have a business partner that is money-minded. So it would be the collaboration of the two. And when I do make my millions, I will put it back, and that will be me saying yes rather than the money man. So definitely. There is a compassion there as well. And as a person that, like, I make everything myself with my hands, I do all the beading and everything, and when I see that, it's so exciting. Like, it's so amazing, and this is something that you just want to nurture. So, definitely. You couldn't help but want to do that.
And you had another question?
Yeah, this was just a comment because, you think of Queensland as being the sunny state and yet we're all wearing black. Now, why do we...
I personally don't know.
Because everybody looks skinny in black.
I don't wear black, so I'm not the person to answer that question.
You look thin in black and you don't have to think about it. I have a lot of my clients that used to come and they'd be like, I'll take that in black, black, black. They'd take the whole collection in black, and I'd always offer everything in black, always. And
is it just because it's safe, though? I think people always compliment me because I'm not wearing black, because I'm wearing colour.
Yeah.
And I think it's just they think they don't know how colour works or something, but it's really...
It's definitely safe, and it's... And a lot of people actually think it looks better on them, but in actual fact, it draws them out.
That's right.
I'm embarrassed.
No, I think it's also about what's there out in the market. It's easy to find something black that's done nicely, that's got detail on it, but it's not always easy to find it in other colours that suit your
Because the
complexion.
buyers, like when I show collections on the runway, I'll always show it in colour. Like I'll do, a colour palette, and I'll never put something black on the runway. But I tell you what, about 50 or 60% of the order is in black. Those pieces in black, you just have, and that's how you make your money. That's like your, your hero pieces, but in black.
But interestingly, historically, people always said that Melbourneites wore black and grey, and people in Queensland, bright sunny, weather, lovely bright colours. And what you're saying is correct. So we might have to rethink that story.
Although, when you think about, designers like Easton Pearson and how successful they are, I mean, they don't do black, or if they do black, it's a very minor section of the collection.
Their market is not Queensland, is it? Entirely.
I think it is. I think they have a very large Queensland, particularly Brisbane market. I mean, I think they have a very consistent, loyal following in Brisbane. And yes, certainly internationally as well. But I think it's black is easy, but I think it's a perception of black rather than a reality of black.
Yeah. Or if you're paying out a lot of money, go safe.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't
know. People do think it makes them look thinner, and look, it does, because it hides the lumps and bumps more, but...
I don't know.
It really does. But then also, I know a lot of people that buy the same pants in, 2 pairs in black, because that's all they wear, It's just their comfort levels, I guess. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, there's one at the back.
Hello. I'm just interested in whether you ladies would be able to consider consulting on a major project. Back to the last person's question about culture and contributing back to the community. I have a major project which I'm working on, which involves a fashion library combined with a club, which would enable people to access whatever they wanted from a fully maintained collection as a membership-based project, and I'm wondering if you might be interested in collaborating on that.
Yeah. I don't know how I could help. These are the experts here, but anything like that is definitely interesting.
I think that's a tentative yes. Yeah. Perhaps you can come and talk to us a little bit more about it afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? There's one right down the front.
Hello. I was wondering if you think, like we had the punks in the 70s, and that was like a global tribe, and they were very distinctive because of their way of dress. What are the main, global movements at the moment that are really distinctive by how they dress, and, it's a global thing?
That's interesting, because I was thinking about punk as something that initially started as, a very subversive political minority, and then was picked up by fashion and became a trend, essentially.
It's never died, really.
That has never died, you're right, and it's continually brought up again. I mean, not a year goes by, I don't think, where one designer doesn't reference punk in their collection.
Or even everyday people wear it.
Yeah. Is there a contemporary equivalent that you can think of? I mean, I just wonder if I often wonder if there's just anything, particularly in fashion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the fact that punk is something that is continually brought up again is evidence of the fact that probably no, there's not. But then at the same time, that it has some kind of continuing relevance to people as a cultural branding. I think it's really a
It
brand
stands
for a lot of
rebellion,
people.
perhaps.
Yeah.
And trends change in punk as well.
That's
Do you know
true.
what I mean? You think of the 80s punk compared to the punk now.
Yeah.
So many similarities, but as far as cut and
the
fabric
original
and...
punk too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm going to answer this in an obtuse way. I think, without trying to be or without being offensive, what I'm trying to say is, for me, the trends in Western fashion, especially business wear, is a global trend. Because what happens somewhere, whoever designs it, whether it's in New York or in Paris, just goes across the world. Women's fashion, business attire, whether it's men or it's women, just becomes the norm. Within a very short span of time, you go to the shopping centres and it's stacked there. You cannot buy anything else but that one. And it's almost scary if you miss the season. For me, I buy long sleeves. If I miss winter, I'm done.
Yeah.
I can't buy anything else. And usually winter gear is wool or heavy material, and so I'm sweating.
But to go back to your question about punk, I think it would be very difficult to be a rebellious dresser now. I mean, we've been through everything, really. We've seen every part of the body. We've done everything we can to hair. You know, what would constitute a rebellious outfit?
Cultural outfit.
Well, like a music group or a... You think
Perhaps it
cultural-
depends on context, though, Margaret. You know, perhaps what's a rebellious outfit in one context isn't in another. And if you're, at a private religious school and you dye your hair pink, then that's probably rebellious within that context.
That's true. I was thinking of the Pussy Riot thing.
That's right. And within that context, within that Russian religious context,
exactly.
that's read
That
as...
really is quite amazing.
It is, but it has gone around. It's gone viral,
viral. That's true.
and it's losing whatever
The impact.
potency it had, and it's just becoming something that people are sharing on Facebook. So I just wonder how things have the opportunity to actually ground themselves within a particular political, social arena long enough to take
That's a good
hold
point.
and have meaning the way that punk did, even though that meaning is perhaps lost now. The integrity of it, is located within that cultural context, and I just don't know that things have the time to necessarily become fully formed before they are, shipped off to
Every new idea is taken
every
up.
top shop.
It's very superficial.
Yeah, and I wonder if that will change. I wonder if we'll reach a point where that kind of saturation will implode and we'll have to go back to perhaps something a little slower and more meaningful.
More functional. And environmentally
That's true. I mean,
sustainable.
there's more external influences, more and more with sustainability, and that then changes what the criteria are for good design and how much of something can be produced. But again, it goes back to what you were saying about it gets to the point where something is almost gone before you get that change, and I think we're just not quite there yet with the environmental impact. There's another one up the back and one just there. Whoever gets there first. Go.
Just talking about the environmental impact, I think we're a lot closer to that catalyst point than most people recognise.
Yes.
There's already big changes with the price of food because in America and Russia and a lot of other places they're down 30 to 40% in production for consecutive years. The balance of our environment is really teetering on the edge, and we're going to see a flow-through effect in all sorts of industries, including fashion, because mainly because of the water. We've got 7 billion people on the planet who are struggling to access clean water, but a large percentage of that is going into the crop production for different textiles and like cotton, linen. They take a lot of water to produce. So there's going to be a big follow-through effect on that. And taking water into consideration, where do you think the textiles and that will move forward in the future?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I'm always surprised that within the sustainability industry, you get things like organic cotton, and it's it's only fixing one very small part of the problem. You know, it's as though things need to be done very incrementally. So I often wonder what's the point in having organic cotton, because you're still having to, you know, it's still one of the most water-intensive crops to produce. Why don't we just, you know, stop doing that and do something else? But it seems inevitable that it has to go through this really drawn-out process. Yeah.
Oh, there's a sense in which people are kind of blinkered, really, I think, to the various environmental problems. And one of our luxuries in life is colour and fashion and beautiful things. It's going to be very hard to train people. I mean, environmentally sustainable clothing is not necessarily all that attractive, is it?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you perceive to be sustainable. For me, that one of the reasons that I wear vintage is because it's sustainable. Yeah. But vintage alone isn't going to solve the fashion problem because there's not enough.
Huge population.
That's right. So I think like any good solution to a global problem, it needs to be multifaceted, and perhaps, you know, reusing things is part of it, but also obviously, you know, changing our ideas, habits about, and perceptions too. I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that, Margaret. I think that's a lot of people's perception of sustainable clothing, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I mean, it may have been, again, part of that developmental stage where, you know, I think part of perhaps even the branding process for sustainable clothing was perhaps making it look green, which I think I think that's a mistake. Yeah. I think the only way that sustainability becomes the dominant norm is for people to stop talking about it and just do it. So when you've got a company like Gorman, who initially, when they first started, their marketing was all about the fact that they were a sustainable company, and their designs were very environmentally conscious. They followed the life cycle of the garment through from design to production to consumption, and really considered the life cycle of that garment. I've noticed in recent years they've stopped talking about it. They're continuing to do it, but they've stopped talking about it, and in that space of time, that brand, its demographic has completely changed. And now it's, you know, a cool young brand.
Yeah. So the marketing...
The consumers have no idea that they're buying something sustainable, and that's good.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I think people have a perception. I think designers, you know, it's designers' responsibility to create good design. That's the purpose of design. And I think that good designers just need to get on with it, stop talking about it, and start creating those solutions to those problems, because I think it's their responsibility as designers.
Yeah, I also think that sustainability works in two domains, the supply and the demand. We've been talking about the manufacturing process, but you also talk that you have made a conscious decision as, you know, this is the demand side of it. As users, what can we influence? Yes, we can boycott or only use or something like that, but parts of sustainability is the life cycle of a piece of clothes or a garment. I mean, I come from a culture where the piece of cloth have to become threads before people bury it. You know, it starts. I remember when I was young, my mom would make a dress for my sister, then my second sister would wear it, and I would inherit it. And when I grow up, my younger sister would inherit it. And if it's got some life in it, then maybe the neighbors would get it. If it doesn't have a lot of life in it, it would be used as a rag around the clothes, you know, to wipe the floors or something like that. Or it could be cut and made into a quilt or a tablecloth or something like that. So by the time it dies, it would have lived for 20 years or so. And I think that's also part of sustainability.
Reuse,
recycle, and so on. It's not just the manufacturing process. We are very consumer, we're very capitalist. We live in a capitalist environment where we all have so much that we cannot wear. I think I'm not the only one who went and bought something that I did not wear. So it's also looking at it both ways. That ethical responsibility that we have as users of fabric.
There was another question, Okay,
I was just going to say that I find that the way the Middle Eastern women wear their clothes is very feminine. It's also extremely comfortable, and when I fly, I wear those type of clothes. And I find that you look good, so your chances of going up to business class are probably really good. And they're warm, nothing creases, it's just very functional. And I think it really looks very splendid. I think some of the westernized clothes that we buy now are extremely uncomfortable. And women find themselves in these extraordinary outfits for a period of time, and it's very uncomfortable. And I think as you get older, like myself, when you get to a fine age of 55, there's nothing out there at all. And so you tend to either make your clothes or you look into vintage, and you don't find many women wearing the dresses because there's nothing out there, so you're trying to look elsewhere. And I'm very much in favour. I think the Middle Eastern fashion for the women look extremely, and it doesn't matter what age you are. I think it was just a comment.
That's a very interesting point. And thanks for that. I'm from the Middle East, so I feel really good now. But apart from that, I think it's the tradition. Traditionally, it's the link between what you wear and the weather. So that is very important. Traditionally, the Middle East is arid, is Sahara, is very hot. And so people could not wear tight-fitting clothes. They needed to wear loose clothing to allow the body to breathe, to allow the air to circulate. And that's why, Middle Eastern women just wear clothes that are not tight-fitting. Men also traditionally wear clothes that are not tight-fitting. The material itself is also cotton-based. I mean, now with the petrol in the Middle East, everything has become synthetic, but traditionally it's cotton-based, and that absorbs and breathes with your body. And then because people love color and so on, they are very colorful and so on. So the link, and somebody else made a point, wearing black in a hot climate, the link between climate and the design of what we wear is also historical, is also very significant, and we tend, with globalization, we tend to forget that, and we tend to wear whatever we are being presented because it's there, because we can't buy what we want, and unless we know how to make it ourselves, we are forced to fit into a space that we don't want to inhabit at any point in time. And I guess the other aspect of it is the cultural aspect, where people value each other because of the values they uphold and the behavior they express towards each other. So people are valued because they are kind, they are humble. The way you look is not really significant in the Middle East. That's why it's okay to wear something fluffy that does not accentuate your body. What matters is that you're a kind person, you contribute to your family, you contribute to your society. The flip side of that, we live in an individualistic society where it's important to feel good, to look good. And I know that sometimes, when I'm looking daggy and I go somewhere, I'm not giving the same courtesy and same service in some areas as somebody who's looking flash and looking sexy and looking good. So it's about how cultures, what they value, what cultures value in people, and the link with the environment around us. That's how I see it. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah, one down the front.
Last one over here. Traditionally, fashion theorists have related the purpose of dress to identifying ourselves through social, political, religious status. I run a blog where I talk to people about their relationship with clothes, and I find that very low on their priorities right now. So I'm wondering, is there a link between the lack of national costume in Australia and our lack of priority on those types of things? Is our culture very diluted with very little emphasis on those things?
I didn't actually hear your question.
Okay, so the question is, do you think our lack of Australian national dress is related to somewhat of an apathy around our social status, our political views, our religious, our social standing? Are we just very diluted and don't really care much about our national identity?
I think we do care about our national identity. I just don't think we extend it to clothing. I think it's almost as if clothes are too constricting. Australians have this flair for doing their own thing, and I think there's something fairly constricting about a national dress. Australians want to rebel. They don't really. There are some larrikins around. I think they just don't want to be herded into the uniform typology of a national outfit. And when you see these images of places like North Korea, you know, where there's this uniformity, you know, absolute classic uniformity of clothing, I think the Australian psyche is completely opposite to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't believe we will ever have a national costume.
I'm amused by the photograph that shows up there of the gold. It's not there at the moment, but there's an image of Uluru in a orange shantung silk.
That's a garment from the Flash Women exhibition, which was on here a couple of months ago.
Yes, and it's actually designed by a Brazilian
like an 18th
woman.
Century.
Yeah.
A fabulous dress.
Yeah, so it's designed by a Brazilian woman, Janeiro Velasquez, and you'd think that her interpretation of a national costume through the kind of Brazilian carnival eyes, which the shiny bright and the indigenous artwork is almost a laugh at the Australian national image.
Look, I think national dress, and we're not talking cultural dress, we're talking national dress, and I make a distinction because I think national dress is a political statement. In many countries, you know, Scottish tartan kilt is a political dress. Historically, it was political.
It is, yeah.
In some countries in Africa, they, as you said, the dominating tribe enforces its traditional dress, and that's a political decision. In Saudi Arabia, the government enforces a national dress, and that's a political decision. So I think national dress, like a national identity, when it hasn't evolved and is forced on people, becomes a political construct. While cultural dress evolves with heritage, with time, and it also it tends to be a little bit fluid because it changes with time. You know, it has no one saying it changes. For me, the Sudanese dress is a cultural dress. It has become a national dress, but it was not forced on people. While the black abaya in Saudi Arabia was a national dress that was politically forced on people for religious reasons.
After the French Revolution, the French government tried to legislate on what clothes people should wear, and had a dress for women, a dress for men, a dress for city councillors and so forth. It just didn't take off because it's very, very difficult to tell people what to wear. It's our one personal kind of thing that we do that's sort of outside the political arena.
I think we might we've gone about half an hour over time, so I think we might leave it there. And I'll just say, if anyone does have any questions that they didn't get answered, please feel free to come up to us and ask them one-on-one afterwards. But I'd just like to thank all of my panellists for being here today, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All our speakers, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And thank you again to our partners, the Romero Centre and Mercedes-Benz Fashion Festival. If you would like to revisit this event or share it with friends, there will be an audio and video webcast available for download on the State Library website in the next few days. So please join us now on the Queensland Terrace for the fabric swap, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just had a bit of a...